celebration year for him.
No, today's topic is Revelstoke merchants, so some of the early businessmen in town. Before we started, just wanted to make an announcement that the next brown bag, scheduled for 2 weeks from now, is going to be cancelled because, of course, we're hosting the BC Historical Federation conference next weekend, and I decided that I might want the week after that to recuperate from it. So what I'll probably do is just switch to the week after that, and then we'll finish our schedule sort of, we'll do the next two 1 week apart if I can. If I can't do that, I'll let you know, but that's what my plan is. I think the next one scheduled was on Parks and Recreation, so I'll just reschedule that for the week following, so whatever that week, the 11? Somewhere between the 9th and the 11th.
I think it's the 11th.
11th, okay, we'll go with the 11th. So that'll be the next Brown Bag history. And then also, just to remind you that we are hosting the BC Historical Federation Conference next week. It starts, there's a free workshop at the Senior Center at 3 o'clock on getting ready for the new Societies Act. And anybody who's involved with a local society might find that of interest. The people who are presenting it are actually a woman from the ministry and a woman who actually drafted a lot of the legislation. So and anyone who's interested in that, that's free. If you let us know if you're coming, then we just have an idea of numbers, but then you just show up there at 3 o'clock at the seniors. And we also have another free talk on the Thursday at 2 p.m. at the Railway Museum. There's an author named Ralph Beaumont, whose daughter Emily Beaumont lives in town. She's a local realtor. And Ralph wrote a book last year on J.W. Heckman, who was a Canadian Pacific photographer. And his book encompasses the Heckman's photographs of CPR operations all across the country. But the talk that he's going to be doing is focusing on Heckman's Rogers Pass photographs. Anybody's welcome to go to that one. You don't need to register, just show up at the Railway Museum for 2 o'clock. Okay, so, and then any other parts of the conference where they're taking registration until Thursday. So if you're interested, come and talk to us here, or go on the conference website at www.bchistory.ca. Okay, and those are our paid political announcements. All right, so we'll start out, probably one of the very first businessmen in town was J. Fred Hume. And he was born in New Brunswick in 1860. He took training in general merchandising and the hotel business from his grandfather in Fredericton, New Brunswick. And during the railway construction, he was following railway construction west. And he was supplying meat to the construction camps. He was actually killing and butchering bison along the railway tracks to supply meat to the construction camps. He got to Donald in July of 1883, which was actually ahead of some of the major construction camps, and established the store there. In the fall of 1884, he moved his stock to Farwell, and there was not a heck of a lot in Farwell at that time, so he would have been one of the first businesses that established here. We have in the archives a letter written by his son, John F. Hume, to Earl Dickey in April 30th, 1950. He said, my oldest sister says that Dad and Mr. McCulloch wintered together in Revelstoke during the winter of 1883 and 1884, and that Dad located, or helped A.S. Farwell locate the Farwell town site, and picked the location for his first store on the Farwell town site as his fee for doing such. Sam Green was also with Dad, as was a man by the name of Hunter. He said Green, Hunter, Captain Troop, and Others built and operated the first boat built at Revelstoke, the Dispatch. So J. Fred Hume's store was on the riverside of Front Street and built of logs, and approximately halfway along the subtle part of the street at that time. It was just a short distance to the southeast of the Columbia House. And when they were bringing stock in, they took part of their stock by raft around the Big Bend of the Columbia River. And the raft got away from them as they were lining through Death Rapids. And luckily, Hume and his partner managed to, were okay, but they lost most of their stock. And they arrived at Farwell, and they discovered that a lot of the rest of the stock, which was still waiting in storage at Donald, had been destroyed in a fire. So they had to build up their stock again, and that was lost in the second fire in Farwell in 1885. So Hume then went into partnership with Robert Lemon, who was another early merchant here. Then in 1887, Hume and Lemon were amongst the earliest miners that were exploring the Toad Mountain area around Nelson. And they had warehouses set up at Sproats Landing, which is around where Robson Castle Guard is now. They formed the Columbia Transportation Company in 1888. It's building some of these early steamboats, and they were using those boats to transport stock up and supplies for the mines up and down the Columbia River to the Castlegar Robson area. So Hume and some of his partners were amongst some of the early men who were exploring Nelson, and they were really responsible for establishing the community of Nelson. So I always like to point out that Nelson was really established by Revelstoke people.
Yes.
I'd like to make that perfectly clear, that Revelstoke came first. But of course, in 1891, J. Fred Hume married Lydia Jane Irvine, who had come to Revelstoke about a year before that as the school teacher. And she was the school teacher at the time that they built the first purpose-built school. Before that, they had been operating out of the Northwest Mounted Police Barracks at the top of Douglas Street Hill. And then in 1891, they built this frame building on the land of what was recently the playing field of Mountain View School. And it was a big frame building. After they built Central School, a brick building on that same property, they moved the old school building to the corner of 2nd and Mackenzie, and it became the first City Hall. So anyway, shortly after J. Fred Hume and Lydia were married, they moved to Nelson. And J. Fred Hume built the Hume Hotel there and was very involved in the mining and business community in Nelson. He was MLA for that area for quite some time, and Minister of Mines. There's a school named after him, so he was a real prominent citizen of Nelson. He brought his cousin out here to work for him in his store. His cousin's name was Clarence Burpee Hume, and he was also born in New Brunswick. He was born in 1867, and he attended a business college in New Brunswick. And then he came out here in 1889 to work for J. Fred Hume. And then when J. Fred Hume moved to Nelson, C.B. Hume bought his stock and started his own company in 1892, originally with partners A.N. Smith, who we talked about last time. He was one of the early mayors here, and also with C.F. Lindmark, also an early mayor. His first store, this one shown here, was built on Track Street near the CPR station. And he also built a warehouse at the corner of 2nd and Campbell, along road about where the Powder Springs Inn is now. He also had a brickyard in town, but I haven't been able to confirm the location of that. I know there was more than one brickyard here. There was brickyards both in Columbia Park and in Big Eddy area. And there was also a brickyard associated with the smelter beyond where the community center is now. So there was a few in town.
Kathy, had there been a fire? Because it really looks like.
Yes, yeah.
And
Well,
is that Mount Revelstoke?
That's Mount Revelstoke. So, yeah, most of Mount Revelstoke was burned off, possibly in the 1880s. We don't have a confirmed date on the fire. And so he also had branch stores at Trout Lake, Beaton, Arrowhead, and also in town on Front Street. So it was really had spread his business out around among the area. In 1903, he opened his new store at the corner of First Street and Mackenzie Avenue. This is where the Royal Bank is now. The article in the newspaper said, CB Human Company's new business block, increasing business of the firm necessitates more commodious quarters. New block will be the finest in the city. They had the front and side elevations. It's 50 by 100 feet, two-story brick construction, and the bricks were manufactured locally by his company. The architect was W.M. Dodd of Calgary, and the contractors were Messrs. Johnston and Company, and one of the contractors was William Gill, who later in the 1926 built this building. The basement had furnace and heavy heating appliances and storage of their surplus stock of groceries, and also their heavy hardware, paints, oils, etc. The ground floor had their grocery, hardware, glass and crockeryware, boot and shoe department, gents furnishings, and dry goods department. And the second floor had their dressmaking and millinery department, and a house finishing department, which included wallpaper and heavy lines of crockery. The offices were at the rear of the store. It was steam heated, and they had a large refrigerator, so it was very modern for its time. They announced when they opened it that they were going to be opening a millinery shop, which is a hat making shop. It says the firm has, and the dressmaker as well, that the firm has secured the services of Miss Gunn, a first-class dressmaker, late of Robert Simpson's Toronto, and will open parlors in their new store. Miss Ward will attend to the millinery department and is now in the East selecting stock. And in the newspapers for many years, they looked through the newspapers, they generally had a full-size ad in pretty well every edition. So they were very much sort of the premier department store in Revelstoke, and not just in Revelstoke. Up to about the First World War, they were noted as the largest department store in the interior of the province, both in terms of size and sales numbers.
And Kathy, would you know approximately what the population of Revelstoke would have been at that time?
Population of Revelstoke in before World War I.
First sentence? I think you said about 3.
The population of Revelstoke around World War I.
Oh, 3,000 in town, 3,000 out.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You didn't have to go to Kelowna to get your stuff.
In fact, there was nothing in Kelowna unless you wanted to buy fruit. They had what they called a cash carrier system installed in May of 1904. So they'd actually have this system where on a pulley where the cash would go up to the central office and then back down to the clerks. And they actually installed an elevator in May of 1909, the Westinghouse elevator, and it was the only elevator outside of Vancouver.
Wow.
In 1904, he married Emily Jane Jones, and Emily Jones was a sister of Mrs. G.O.P. Davis. Who they were a well-known railway family in town, and she was also a sister of Estelle Dickey's father. So Estelle Dickey, when she came here to work for the C.B. Hume Company because Mrs. Hume was her aunt. And she said that in an interview we have with her, she said she worked 4 years until she got married to Earl Dickey. She came here in 1916, and she handled the cash from the cash carrier system. And the Humes also had a ranch out near at Williamson's Lake. They bought the original Williamson's farm. And she said the Hume Ranch was on the other side of the road to Hayes Ranch, where Hay Road is. It's on the east side of that road. And there was a Japanese man, Kei Shiozaki, if I remember rightly, that ran it. And he used to grow strawberries and rhubarb and all manner of stuff like that and supply the store. And the strawberries were really lovely. They used to ship them out. There was a train that went out at midnight going east. They'd ship so many crates every night when the season was good. They'd ship them to Calgary for the stores. And they were there in Calgary for the time the stores opened. And she went on to say they had a milliner and an apprentice. And sometimes they had 2 apprentices. And that was in the days when they made the hats. They were made with wire frames, like you'd make a lampshade now. And for the dressmaker, she said people would buy the material for a dress or a suit, and then they'd get a hat made out of the same material. There's C.B. Hume in his office. And over there, it's inside. Yeah, I like the cups and saucers. I'd like to go back for a day and buy them all up. The bottles of ketchup. And they actually had products made with their own label. We have a couple of vinegar bottles in our collection with the C.B. Hume label on them, and other products that were made and labeled. There's their dry goods department. You can purchase fabric and have the dressmaker make your dress for you, or make your own on your treadle sewing machine. And there's the luggage, and it's like the shoe department.
Didn't you have to go in there with a list and the people got your stuff and brought it to the counters?
Yeah, for the groceries, you didn't shop like you do in a grocery store now. There's the grocery department. They also had premium goods, so if you bought a certain amount of groceries, you'd get a plate, so you could collect a set of plates. And they had this Madalta pottery pieces, so we've got some milk jugs and ashtrays and other pieces from the Madalta company that have the C.B. Hume name on them. There's a big coffee grinder in the front. And that's a great picture of a window display. I've never been able to figure out what that is right there. It almost looks like it could be a ham with cloves in it, but it's hard to say. And then they've taken packages and put them all around there. And then fruit and nuts all around. So somebody spent a lot of time putting that display together. And this was a C.B. Hume home. It was built in 1905. And it took up the whole block where Nims Manor is now. After Mrs. Hume moved away, it was kind of in disrepair for a while. You can see even this picture, there's a lot of broken windows, and some of the lattice work at the bottom is broken. So this picture would have been taken a little later. But at one time they had that whole block, and it was the grand houses on Mackenzie Avenue.
Whereabouts on Mackenzie would that?
It's where Nims Manor Apartments is now, but between 7th and 8th Street. Right across from Minto Manor.
I used to deliver papers
So a lot of the early stores didn't survive the Depression, but C.B. Hume managed to get, even the First World War. He managed to get through First World War, During the Depression, his business was falling off, but he was getting elderly at that time. He ceased operations by 1936 or 1937. The business was eventually mortgaged to Kelly Douglas Company. The last newspaper ad that I was able to find was in 1933. He died in May of 1937 at the age of 69 as the result of pneumonia. And his widow lived on until 1964, died at the age of 83. But it was definitely one of the important businesses in town. The building was later purchased by the Co-op Society, and Revelstoke had a cooperative store for many years. And they operated out of that building until they built their new building, which is where City Furniture is now. Yeah. The Bourne brothers were another early business here. There were 4 brothers, all born in London in the 1860s. Frank Herbert, Henry Josiah, Edward James, and John Dupre. And the first 3 brothers were the ones that were most involved in the business. They had their first building in the 100 block east on Victoria Road. And then they built this large frame building on the north side of the railway on Track Street. They were here as early as June of 1889. We have the very first issue of the first newspaper that was printed here was the Kootenai Star. And their first issue was June 22nd, 1889. And there was a Bourne Brothers ad in that issue. And it said in the ad, it said they had on hand a first-class assortment of groceries, provisions, gents' furnishings, hats and caps, boots and shoes, stationery, patent medicines, Havana and domestic cigars, rough and dressed lumber, soft drinks, also bakers and confectioners' goods. And they were also dealers in choice California fruit. Orders were promptly attended to. They had their hardware in this smaller building here. The second floor was a public hall. We have a program in our archives from a little entertainment that they had in 1895 in their hall. And then this section here was the Revelstoke Station Post Office. It opened in 1891. From 1891 to 1901, there were 2 post offices. There was one on Front Street and one at the station. They later had a building on, a couple of different buildings on Mackenzie Avenue. One of them was across from Malone's, and one was in the Malone's building. So that was originally built as Gallicano's store and bakery. So the grocery department moved into that building, and their hardware store was across the street. And the one across the street is no longer there because that's where they later built the housing block. By 1905, Frank Herbert Bourne was the sole owner of the company. And he had the big store building built in 1911 and opened in 1912, what's now Style Trend. And that was built as Bourne Brothers store. And it was built by O.W. Abrahamson, local contractor. And I've had quite a few Bourne family members visit over the years. There was one woman, Eleanor Lockton, who was born in Revelstoke. Her father was Frank Herbert Bourne, and they lived on 1st Street West. There's a house down the street with nice white pillars. That was the Bourne house. And she grew up, and she and her husband would drive up every year from California. Her husband had they were probably both about this tall. And her husband drove a Cadillac. They'd drive up from California, and they'd stay at the Regent, and they'd come and visit me, and they'd go and look at the house. And she had lots of incredible stories about growing up in Revelstoke and being part of this prominent merchant family in town. And I'm still in touch with her relatives. And another member of the family came up and they were wanted to know where the family gravestone was. And they said, that's really easy. You just go up to the caretaker's shed and walk down the road in front of the shed until about 3/4 of the way down until you see the big red marker that looks like a chess piece. So if you're, it's a very prominent red granite marker, and just in that section of the cemetery. And 3 of the brothers' names are on the one marker, so the burials are all in that one area.
What's the name of that hotel, Kathy?
That's the Hotel Climax. Famous hotel.
Sketchy
Across the
reputation.
street is beer.
And if you were following my Facebook page, you'll see that it was 100 years ago last week that it burned down. Yeah. I've talked about that one before. It had an interesting history. I think in my Crime and Punishment one, I talked about a murder that took place there. And they couldn't quite, nobody was charged because there was so much conflicting evidence, they couldn't figure out exactly who had done what to whom, so nobody was charged in that. But,
Not a reputable merchant.
and they had this, they were getting in trouble all the time because they, I think there was a bylaw that was put in place that the taxi drivers were not allowed to pick up from there because they did this thing called rolling, where they'd get a customer in. If they saw that he had a sizable amount of money, they'd ply him with alcohol, and then they'd call the taxi, the horse-drawn taxi, and they had an arrangement with the taxi, so the taxi driver would steal the guy's money and dump him in the bush or dump him off the side of the road. That was referred to as rolling. This man is William McCrae Lawrence. He was born in Cape Town, South Africa in 1861. His father was a Methodist missionary who was working in South Africa. His father, the Reverend James Lawrence, actually did all the photographic development work for the Livingston expedition after its return from Central Africa. At the age of 5, William was taken to Scotland, and as an adult he moved to Winnipeg, where he operated a hardware business for several years. He came to Revelstoke in May of 1897 and opened the hardware business in the McCarty block on Track Street. We were looking at this last time when we were talking about Frank McCarty, the first mayor. So this was this big building, and it's got a false front. So I've seen some pictures of panoramas of Revelstoke from the hill looking down, and you can see the back profile of the building. So it had the peaked roof with the false front in front of it. But on this side was the McDowell Atkins Watson Drug Company, and then Frank McCarty's meat market was there, and then on this end was William Lawrence. And when William Lawrence came, he had a tinsmith working for him in Winnipeg, and he had the tinsmith relocate with him as well. And that man was Edgar Burridge. And of course Edgar Burridge later established his own tinsmithing company in town, and that became Burridge's Plumbing and Heating, and that name still exists now. So the Burridge name goes back to 1897 in Revelstoke. In 1905, Lawrence opened a new building on Mackenzie Avenue. It was the building that's now housing the Roxy Theatre. It cost $22,000 to build in 1905. The architect was W.A. Dalton. The brick and stonework were done by E.C. Fromey. The main contractor was W.A. Foote, who was later with Pratolini was the main contractor on the courthouse and quite a few other buildings in town. The bricks were from the C.B. Human Company brickyards, and the stone came from a quarry north of the CPR tracks. I know, there's beautiful stuff in those showcases. Actually, the showcases are similar to ones that we have here in the museum.
What are the grates? Are those heating grates, or they, like below the display case?
Like heating.
I know, it's like heaters.
Yeah, I guess those would be radiators. And,
The glass itself.
so this is the building that's now the Roxy. And so you can see what they did when they converted it to the Roxy is they just covered the facade with the current ones, but the windows are still there. And those ads are still there. You can still see those ads on the side of the building. The Lawrence company went out of business during World War I. It was very difficult on a lot of the merchants because so many people had left, and a lot of the families that were here couldn't afford to buy from the stores, or they were operating on credit. And when their credit burden got too high, a lot of the businesses just had to fold. The Lawrence Hardware was taken over by the C.B. Human Company, and they continued to operate it as the Columbia Hardware Company. This was the Lawrence house. It's not a great photograph because it was reproduced from a newspaper, but this was built in 1898, and it's the house with the red roof, and it's now the mustard color siding just across from the Same Sun Hostel, just on the corner out here.
Oh, you're kidding.
So that was the Lawrence's first house, and then they later built what became known locally as the Brandon House on the second one in from the corner on the 3rd and Mackenzie.
That's Judy was
And F.B. Wells was born in England in 1859 and came to Canada in 1883. He briefly homesteaded near Winnipeg, but he wasn't very successful. There was an article reprinted in the Revelstoke Review in 1940 that said he acquired an area of land, some equipment, and a team of oxen. His experience with the oxen was far from satisfactory, and his elementary knowledge of plowing and handling the creatures ended his career as a farmer. The oxen ran away after Mr. Wells had plowed a few uneven furrows and continued running until they tangled themselves up in some bush. The experience was enough for the young Londoner, who immediately packed up his things and started out for Winnipeg on foot. As he passed his neighbor, a mile from his own place, he shouted, "There are a couple of bulls tied up in the trees over yonder. Go and untie them and they're yours." So instead of farming, he got work with the CPR as a clerk, initially in Winnipeg. And he was transferred to Revelstoke in 1886 as a clerk to the master mechanic. In 1889, he purchased the men's clothing store of T.A.W. Gordon, who had been who was running this store on Front Street. And Gordon was the first postmaster in Revelstoke. He was running the Lower Town Post Office out of his men's clothing store. So Wells became the postmaster, and he held that position until 1901 when they consolidated the two post offices. And this is an interesting photograph. It came from the granddaughter of F.B. Wells, and it was actually inside of a paperweight. And that's why you can see that's actually the glass, the sort of curved glass that you're seeing there. But that's the only photograph that we have of the exterior of the F.B. Wells store on Front Street. And another photograph of the interior of the store. So we can see all the boots and shoes and a hat, men's hats over on the side. We have some stationery from his store. He used the slogan, "Wells wears well." He was very active in sports. He was a member of the first Revelstoke Ski Club, and was responsible for bringing in some of the first imported pairs of skis from Minneapolis. Before that, people were just making their own skis. This is an article from February 6, 1947. Said the late F.B. Wells organized the first ski club in 1890, dates maybe a bit shaky, but he brought the first skis to Revelstoke from Minneapolis. These were highly ornate skis of that time, being as much prized for their decorative effect as for their serviceability. Mr. Wells' name appears in many early records of skiing in the district. He was one of a number of intrepid slab men who essayed the journey from Revelstoke to the Lardo country on skis. That's the first time I'd heard skiers referred to as slab men. He also was a fur buyer. He bought furs from a lot of the local trappers. And of course, downstairs in our main exhibit area, we have his fur press that he had made for his company in about 1912 or so. And it's quite an interesting contraption. And the really interesting thing, if you look closely at it, on the sides of it, you'll see where they've done some tallies of furs in pencil. So on one side it says 5 grizzlies, and on the other one they're tallying up numbers of bear and numbers of skunk. So you can actually still see that printing on the piece. He after his death, his sons moved the business to the corner of Mackenzie and First Street. He also had mining interests. He was a shareholder in the McCulloch Creek mine and president of the Keystone Mines and Camp Creek Hydraulic Company. He died in 1940. This was his home at the corner of Kootenai and Douglas Street, right at the top of the hill. I think it was later moved. I think it was later built onto, because I think it has another dormer there as well. Charles Ronald McDonald was a local druggist. He was born in Boston in 1876 and came to Revelstoke in 1897 for the druggist, as druggist for the Canada Drug and Book Company. And it was located right at the corner of Victoria Road and First and Mackenzie Avenue. So, so it's right where the grizzly bear would be right there. It was where the parking lot is now. That was built out right along, up to and along Victoria Road until those buildings burned down in 1914.
The drugstore sold pianos, organs,
Bicycles, yeah,
Typewriters.
and books. There was, I read a note in some early work by B.R. Atkins, who was a newspaper editor here, and he said that because it was so close to the tracks, whenever a train would go by, the books, which were sort of in the upper, they were aligned, you had to go up by a ladder, and they were up on the walls there. Books would shake, so people started calling it the Canada Drunken Book Company.
Were the tracks located where they are now?
Yes. Yeah, so just across Victoria. So this is right in the corner of Victoria and Mackenzie. So this was in 1912. He had a new building built where the Taco Club is now, and that was his drugstore. He ran it there for about 30 years. He was one of the original members of the Revelstoke Mountaineering Club when it formed in 1909, and long before that he was one of the early people that was exploring Mount Revelstoke and really promoted Mount Revelstoke to the local community. He was a photographer as well, and he had turned a lot of his photographs into postcards, and we still have quite a few C.R. MacDonald postcards in our collection. So he was, he would have displays in his windows sometimes of Mount Revelstoke or the flowers, alpine flowers up there. The highest point visible from town on Mount Revelstoke is known as MacDonald's Bluff, and that name is still attached to that spot. And there was in April 3rd, 1912, there was a lengthy obituary in the newspaper for Pickles. It was the Fox Terrier. It was owned by C.R. MacDonald, who died at the age of 15, and Pickles was well known in the downtown community. He would he would always go to the local restaurants looking for handouts. It said he was never turned down, so he was a popular part of the community. So McDonald eventually moved to the coast and sold the store. It continued as a drugstore though until probably about the 1970s. Ken's aunt and uncle, Myers, ran it as Myers Drugstore until early 1970. And this was the interior of the store. And it had, as a lot of the downtown businesses had, it had that pressed-in ceiling. And you can see that they had ladders up to the second tier of books. That's showing the buildings on Mackenzie Avenue. So that was the C.R. McDonald drugstore, and then Guy Barber's jewelry store. This was the another jewelry store. Later became Views and eventually English's. And there's C.R. McDonald right there, and his wife, and the bag that they have has C.R. McDonald name on it. It's a bag from his drugstore. It's for their picnic. And down at this end is Dr. Hamilton and his wife, Mary. So just you just do one more today. This is Robert Howson. He was born in 1864 in Ontario, homesteaded in Saskatchewan, which was then part of the Northwest Territories. He married Fanny Campbell in Moosomin, Northwest Territory in 1887. He was began working as a CPR carpenter, and Fanny was working as a cook on the carpentry crews. As a married man, he was given a boxcar as a home, and their first son, Joseph, was born in the boxcar on May 27th, 1888. They came to Revelstoke in 1889, and their next child was born in 1890. He was one of the first children born in Revelstoke, Leonard. Robert began working as a building contractor, and he was, when he came here, just after he came here in June of 1890, a local contractor and builder, C.J. Barrett, had just brought in a large stock of caskets and funeral goods, and he sold his business to Robert Howson just 2 weeks after his stock arrived. Howson, then he became the local undertaker. He also expanded into the furniture business and had his first store on Douglas Street. In 1891, he built the city's first toboggan slide for $95, and he built the CPR Ice House also in 1891. In 1892, he built the C.B. Hume store, the frame one that I showed you earlier. And then in 1893, he built the Roman Catholic Church on the corner where the C.B. Hume brick store was later built. He built his new store, this building, at Mackenzie Avenue near Victoria Road, so about also where the parking lot is on the other side, near the male grizzly bear. And again, there were businesses right up to that side of Victoria Road. That building was destroyed by fire in 1916, but he'd already moved his stock to his new shop. His new building was the Howson Block, which stretches from 2nd Street up to, I guess it's Kids on Main now. All of those blocks were part of the Howson Block that was built in 1910, 1911 by O.W. Abrahamson. And on the end where Whereabouts is now, they had their furniture store, and their morgue was in the basement, and the chapel, furniture repair shop, and storage was upstairs. And then their furniture display area was on the main floor. This was showing a part of the Howson Block, so from here. And The other buildings in there were the Sturdy Hardware, the Abused Drugstore. It was originally Fred Young's Ladies Wear. In this photograph in the 40s, it's Ramsden Ladies Wear. And then next to that was Kenny McRae's Menswear, and then the Housen building. They ran into financial difficulties during the war and had a big closeout sale. They moved to Trail in 1915, and where they ran a furniture store. But in February 1920, they resumed operations back in Revelstoke, but they moved their store over to the next building, the next block, so where Brandon's Furniture Store and more recently the consignment store was located. And their son Len Housen was running the business at that time. In 1926, they bought the Scandinavian Hall, and they moved it to the lot next to the store, replaced the pitched roof with a flat one, and converted it into the funeral chapel. They sold the business to A.S. Brandon that year, and it still has the Brandon name attached to it. He built his, I always find it interesting that they have one of the most beautiful private homes in town and one of the ugliest business blocks. So this was their home that they had built in 1905. It was made of concrete block, manufactured locally by E.C. Fromey, and the carpentry was done by G.M. Clark. It cost $10,000, which is a lot of money for a home in 1905.
Where, is that still standing?
That's Minto Manor now. Yeah, and a lot of the original features are still there. What this was known as a widow's walk, that's no longer there. That kind of feature doesn't do well in Revelstoke winters. But they've managed to keep a lot of the exterior quite similar to the original look.
Yeah.
So I think we'll stop it there. I have another bit on Henry Corsier, but maybe I'll just run through the photographs without talking much about them. This is just Front Street in 1898, and there was Corsier's General Store down there. Of course, the Corsier family is known. There's a lot of natural features in the area named after Corsier, and this was who Corsier was. He was an early merchant in the area. And his wife was, when she married and came here, she was working as the milliner in his shop. She was a very talented artist. And if you go down into her little parlor downstairs, you'll see some of her paintings on the wall that were done in 1907 and around that era. This is Henry Noble Corsier up here with some of the other local businessmen, F.B. Wells again, a few others. And then he later had an insurance business next to where Style Trend is now, and then later where the florist shop was, a building that was torn down a few years ago to make way for Dr. LeBuc's expansion of his business. And that was the Corsier home on Front Street. That's where the big hotel, big apartment building is at the south end of Front Street. And then Smythe, who had a building across this was his precursor to the building that is now across the street. But I'll just show you this photograph because he had a cigar store. He also sold bicycles, cameras, candy. You could get, that's where you could get your fishing licenses. But it's interesting to note that there's a whole bunch of hookahs on the counter in front of him, because at that time opium would still have been legal. And he was also was prominent in the local poultry association. We have some of the awards that he won for his poultry. And that's about it for today.